doing the action. And it came up. We inside the building. See, both fights was inside the building. That's why nobody ended up.
YNW Bortlen just got dragged into the spotlight in the worst way, and the streets are buzzing louder than ever. The word is, Bortlen's snitching finally caught up to him, and it got so heated that fists started flying. Meanwhile, Melly's future is looking darker by the day, with people saying he is most likely going to stay behind bars for good, and his family is absolutely crushed.
There's nothing to snitch on. We're innocent. Zoe, say this with me.
But the real question everybody is asking is this: was Bortlen's decision to flip truly the only option he had? Or was it a calculated revenge scheme brewing for years? The courtroom was icy still, with tension thick enough to choke on, when Judge Martin S. Fine prepared to deliver one of the most game-changing rulings hip-hop has ever seen. No cap. This wasn't just another case. This was history being written in real time. On September 9th, 2025, just one day before jury selection was supposed to begin, YNW Bortlen shocked the culture by copping a plea deal that would forever flip the narrative around one of rap UI's most infamous murder trials. This single move wasn't just about survival. It was like dropping a bomb in the middle of Broward County's courtroom, a decision that could very well bury his day one homie, YNW Melly, for life.
YNW Melly is accused of murdering his two close friends. They all were in a studio. They get in a car. In the front driver position was YNW Bortlen. According to prosecutors, Melly was seated behind the driver. On video, he's captured getting into the car behind the driver. What police knew afterwards is that Bortlen, the driver, showed up to the hospital with two dead bodies.
And what makes it even crazier? Just months ago, Bortlen was standing tall, swearing loyalty, saying he'd never fold. Now, with one signature, everything changed, and the betrayal is echoing far beyond the courthouse walls. Bortlen had been moving like he was untouchable, talking tough, screaming innocence and preaching unity like nothing could break their bond. He was out here telling everyone, "We solid." But when the prosecutors turned up the heat, that whole tough guy energy vanished fast. Suddenly, the courtroom confidence in his voice started cracking, and that ride-or-die mentality he pushed for so long began collapsing under the weight of Florida's brutal justice system. To really see how deep this story runs, you gotta rewind and dig into the tangled web of loyalty, street politics, and backdoor legal moves that set the stage for this explosive betrayal. The roots of it all trace back to Gifford, Florida, a small, gritty hood where dreams of rap stardom collided with the harsh reality of poverty and gang culture.
They asked him, what happened? He said, we got shot at. They can't find anything that showed there was a shooting there. No broken glass, no spent shells. They can't find any evidence. That becomes suspicious. It also becomes suspicious with certain things with his demeanor.
This is where Jamel Maurice Demons, better known as YNW Melly, and Cortland Malik Henry, aka YNW Bortlen, came up together riding for the same vision under the YNW banner, Young New Wave, or Young Nigga World, depending on who you asked. But this wasn't just some clout-chasing rap crew trying to blow up off a couple tracks. Nah, this was family.
You already know Bortlen, he fair play. Once YNWA Melly lawyers, I'm trying to put all that shit on him. He felt disrespected, betrayed it.
A brotherhood built in the trenches, forged through long nights of struggle, ducking street violence, and holding on to the same dream, escaping the cycle through hip-hop. Alongside Melly and Bortlen stood Anthony Williams, YNW Sack Chaser, and Christopher Thomas Jr., YNW Juvie, two more brothers who would play a tragic role in the bloody legacy of this group. Together, they weren't just chasing fame, they were chasing survival. Christopher Thomas Jr., YNW Juvie, and Anthony Sack Chaser Williams were two young kings with bright futures, and their lives were ripped away far too soon.
When you shoot that thing, the bullet usually flies out to the left. Not only to the left, it usually flies out in close proximity of where the shooter would be. They found spent shells in the car. Now that defeated the entire theory that Bortlen told them that they got shot up by another car.
On the night of October 26, 2018, the crew had just wrapped up a late studio session in Fort Lauderdale, chasing the dream, like they always did. After the session, all four brothers, Melly, Bortlen, Juvie, and Sack Chaser, piled into a Jeep, never realizing this would be the last ride they'd ever take together. What started as another night of music turned into one of the darkest chapters hip-hop has ever seen. According to prosecutors, Melly was the one who pulled the trigger inside that Jeep, while Bortlen played wheelman in the most sinister role of all. The state claims this wasn't some random beef gone wrong. They re-saying it was a calculated execution with a cover-up straight out of a movie script.
Then they watch Melly almost get a death penalty sentence. Then he sit back and hearing Thug situation. Like, damn, Thug that told. He said everything going on. He said how everybody get treated. Then he thinking about, like, if I risk all this, like, I get 2 life sentence and 70 years or whatever they were saying. Man, I'm not finna roll the dice with this bullet. Man, I'm finna go in.
The narrative painted by the prosecution is chilling. After the gunfire, Bortlen allegedly helped stage the entire crime scene to make it look like their brothers had fallen victim to a drive-by ambush. By 4:35 a.m., Bortlen was pulling up to Memorial Hospital Miramar with 2 lifeless bodies riddled with bullets, trying to sell a story of chaos and terror. He painted the picture of a car full of young rappers blindsided by random street violence, hoping the authorities would buy it without question. And at first, the lie almost held up, because in the world they came from, drive-bys were tragically believable. But once the forensics team got their hands on the evidence, everything started to unravel, and the picture they uncovered told a much darker story. One of betrayal blood, and a deadly setup that shocked everyone who thought these brothers were inseparable.
Point the fingers out. He didn't snitch. He didn't say anything like that. But a lot of people believe what he did is like what Gunna did to young.
The prosecution wasn't just coming in blind. They built their case brick by brick, and the breakdown shows just how surgical their approach really was.
Bortlen took a plea agreement today. He's gonna get 10 years in prison, 6 years on like home confinement and like house arrest, and a lot more other stipulations and like that. But that's all he gonna have to do. Probably, I think some of the time served and a whole bunch of like that. So he's taking a deal. He didn't say Melly did anything.
Forensic investigators dismantled the entire drive-by story, proving the fatal shots didn't come from outside the Jeep at all. Instead, the evidence pointed straight inside the vehicle, with ballistics tracing back to where Melly was sitting. That revelation flipped everything upside down. What had been sold as random street beef suddenly looked like the ultimate betrayal. Think about it. Those bullets didn't come from some rival sliding by in another whip. They came from a seat inside the same car, from someone close enough to dap you up one minute and pull the trigger the next.
This might have been a dry snitch, and his snitch might have been even stronger. Melly saying he was never in the car. Melly saying he didn't kill nobody.
That betrayal on a level that echoes Judas himself. Betrayal by someone you trusted with your life. The charges that followed were brutal, the type that can erase a man's entire future in one courtroom session. Melly was hit with 2 counts of first-degree murder conspiracy to commit murder and aggravated assault, leaving him staring down the possibility of life without parole, or even the death penalty under Florida's ruthless, new, non-unanimous death penalty law.
Bortlen took a deal to say I was there. You know, I was there, this was my role in the murder, this was that and that. You know, that is hard to do and hard to say now because Melly is saying he was never there.
Meanwhile, Bortlen wasn't spared either. He was slapped with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of accessory after the fact, witness tampering, conspiracy, and a list of gang-related charges that could bury him for decades.
But it made it hard for the defense to say, you know, Melly didn't do this when this guy clearly took a deal and said, look, this is my part, I did.
On paper, the state's case looked airtight. They had surveillance footage, they had ballistics, they had cell phone records mapping movements, and even a shell casing discovered inside the Jeep itself.
Mr. Henry, again, 2 cases. We're going to do one at a time. In case number 19, 1871 CF10A, as to count 3, accessory after the fact to murder in the first degree.
But underneath all that evidence, there were layers of complexity, rival loyalties, shaky alliances, and the question of whether someone was playing a deeper game that hadn't yet surfaced. The defense wasn't a T about to roll over and let the prosecution steamroll the narrative. They came out swinging like their lives depended on it.
In case number 23, 10643 CF10A, as to count 1, tampering with a witness in a capital felony, and count 7, unlawful use of a two-way communication device. How are you going to plead, sir? Guilty, not guilty, or no contest?
Melly's legal team hit back hard, questioning the very legitimacy of the evidence itself, and even suggesting that some of it might have been planted. Their argument was bold. Either Melly acted in self-defense, or he was the victim of a larger conspiracy designed to take him down from the inside. They pushed the idea that the state's case wasn't airtight at all, but full of holes and dripping with reasonable doubt.
That boy Bortlen just made Melly fell down to his knees when the lawyer came. Not the law, the lawyer came. The lawyer that came to Melly said, I told him, man, your warder, your round, your partner, your dog just took a plea.
For Bortlen, the strategy was a whole different playbook, but just as captivating. His lawyers painted him not as an accomplice, but as a young man caught in chaos, blindsided and terrified. They argued he didn't know what Melly was about to do, claiming his only focus that night was driving the Jeep and trying to avoid getting shot himself. Instead of a cold-blooded conspirator, they cast Bortlen as another victim of a nightmare spinning way beyond his control, a bystander trapped in a deadly storm.
He signed a proffer, man, finna tell it all, man. Took them life sentence off the table. Yeah, man.
The courtroom drama was intense and dragged out like a Hollywood thriller, with every new argument sparking gasps and whispers from the gallery.
We followed by 6 years of reporting probation. I will impose mandatory court costs. Pursuant to 943.325, I will need a set of your prints and DNA.
Melly's first trial kicked off in June 2023, and by the time it wrapped, the entire country was watching with bated breath. On July 22, 2023, the case ended in stunning fashion. A mistrial.
Probably paint that picture to him. Even if they don't use Bortlen information in that proffer for Melly case, it's still gonna weaken his defense. Ain't no way they ain't gonna hear what Bortlen said.
The jury deadlocked 9-3, leaning toward conviction on lesser manslaughter charges, but unable to reach a unanimous verdict. That hung jury was a shocking lifeline for the defense, proof that at least some jurors were in a T fully convinced by the state S narrative.
Case number 19, 1871 CF10A, as to count 3 and count 4. I will adjudicate you guilty, sentence you to 10 years in Florida State Prison.
It was a major W that kept Melly alive in the legal fight, planting seeds of doubt that the defense would cling to as the saga pushed forward. When those first-degree murder charges came crashing down, the courtroom wasn't just a legal battlefield. It became a test of loyalty, trust, and survival. And that's when the cracks in their so-called brotherhood started to split wide open.
Use Bortlen information in that proffer for Melly case, it's still gonna weaken his defense. Ain't no way they ain't gonna hear what Bortlen said. They're gonna use it against him, man.
During Melly's 2023 trial, his own defense team played one of the coldest cards in the book, pointing the finger at Bortlen himself, hinting that he could have been the shooter. It wasn't about truth. It was about strategy, about planting just enough doubt in the jury's mind to save Melly from a death sentence.
They'll put it like, it ain't gonna work against him, it's gonna work against him. Melly cooked, he done.
But that reasonable doubt tactic came with a price, and that price was betrayal. Imagine being Bortlen, sitting there while your day one brother's lawyers basically set you up as the fall guy. That move didn't just shake the case, it planted a poisonous seed, a resentment that would eventually bloom into the shocking plea deal bombshell we saw in September 2025. It was the ultimate reminder that when the stakes are life or death, even the tightest bonds of brotherhood can become collateral damage in the fight for survival. After the mistrial, the tension between the two was impossible to ignore. What once looked like an unbreakable bond was now cracked, splintered, and bleeding. Then came the tweet, Bortlen dropping that cryptic message, "Mind games don't work on people like me." On the surface, it looked harmless, maybe even motivational. But fans and legal experts dissected it like scripture, wondering if it was shade at Melly, a shot at the prosecution, or a subtle warning of what was to come.
They don't use bullet information in that proffer for Melly case. It's still gonna weaken his defense. Ain't no way they ain't gonna hear what Bortlen said. They're gonna use it against him, man.
Looking back now, that tweet feels less like a throwaway post and more like a prophecy, a public hint that Bortlen was already leaning toward cooperation long before the ink dried on his plea deal. The strategy by prosecutors wasn't sloppy. It was cold, calculated, and ruthless to the core. When Bortlen was arrested in a dramatic raid at his Miami home while out on bond, it wasn't just about locking him up. It was a power move, a flex that screamed loud and clear. The state wasn't playing games, and they'd keep cranking the pressure until somebody finally cracked. That timing wasn't random either. It was chess, not checkers. By zeroing in on Bortlen, the prosecution knew that if they could either secure his conviction or flip him into cooperating, they'd finally lock in the missing puzzle piece needed to bury Melly in the retrial once and for all. They weren't about to repeat the embarrassment of the 2023 mistrial. This time, every angle was covered, every crack in loyalty was exploited. And when the deal landed on the table, the plea that Bortlen ultimately took wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was a cultural earthquake. To the streets, it looked like the ultimate violation of the code, the kind of betrayal that leaves a permanent stain on your name. Snitching isn't just a legal decision. In the world they came from, it's social suicide, a scarlet letter that never fades. But to really grasp why Bortlen's choice cut so deep, you've got to look beyond the legal documents and into the cultural weight of betrayal. In hip-hop, loyalty isn't just preached in songs, it's the currency of respect. When your day one flips on you, it doesn't just shake your case, it shakes your whole legacy.
Most rappers would do you like that. It ain't too many rappers that's gonna, take their charge. When they bring in all this money per month and they change so many lives. And so many words, they let you know like their life more important than yours. You ain't no artist, you don't bring no real money on. You cause damage, so you take the fall.
So when the morning of September 9th, 2025 arrived, it carried the weight of 6 long years filled with legal wars, shattered dreams, and a brotherhood ripped apart at the seams. As Cortland Bortlen Henry walked into that Broward County courtroom, he wasn't just facing a decision about his future. He was about to decide the fate of the man he once called his brother, YNW Melly, and possibly hammer in the final nail on a bond that could never be repaired. When the details of Bortlen's plea deal hit the courtroom, jaws dropped. It was almost unbelievable how sweet the state made it look. This man went from staring down a lifetime behind bars, possibly multiple life sentences stacked on top of each other, to suddenly being offered a way out that could have him walking the streets again in just a few years. For someone who had been dangling on the edge of a legal death sentence, this deal was nothing short of shocking. The terms sounded too good to be real. 10 years in prison, with credit for the 4.5 years he had already served, plus 6 years of probation. That meant Bortlen could realistically be home before the decade closed out. A light at the end of a tunnel most believed he'd never escape. And when Judge Fine broke it all down in court, the contrast was crystal clear. Either rot in prison forever, or take the state's golden ticket and trade loyalty for freedom. It was a deal that showed just how powerful plea bargains can be in America's justice system, and just how ruthless prosecutors can get when they want to break a code of silence. As part of the agreement, Bortlen pleaded no contest to 4 reduced charges. 2 counts of accessory after the fact to a capital felony, 1 count of witness tampering, and 1 count of unlawful use of a two-way communication device. In return, prosecutors wiped some of the heaviest charges off the board, dropping both counts of first-degree murder, one additional tampering charge, and even the gang leadership allegation that could have buried him alive. It was prosecutorial gameplay at its finest. Strip the case down, secure cooperation, and reshape the trial narrative. But in the streets, the optics were toxic. What the courtroom called strategy, the culture called betrayal. And the second word got out, the hip-hop community knew. This wasn't just a legal move. This was the ultimate violation of the code. But the most explosive piece of Bortlen's deal wasn't about what charges he dodged. It was about what he agreed to give up in return. Hidden inside the paperwork was the bombshell that would stain his name forever. Bortlen agreed to sit down and provide a sworn statement, a full proffer, laying out his role in the bloody events of October 2018. That requirement alone became the fuel for endless accusations, painting him as a snitch, a traitor, and a man who turned his back on the very brotherhood that made him. In the courtroom, it was presented like just another procedural move. The judge's approval seemed to offer Bortlen protection, making his words in that proffer inadmissible in certain ways. But anyone with experience, from legal analysts to street veterans, knew better. In reality, those words weren't disappearing. They were ammunition, ready to be molded into the prosecution's case against Melly. No matter how much the paperwork tried to shield him, the truth was simple. Once Bortlen started talking, the streets would never see him the same way again. The reaction was instant and brutal. Legal experts and hip-hop heads alike tore into the deal, calling it calculated and cold. Attorney John M. Phillips, who represents YNW Sackchaser's family in a civil suit, wasted no time blasting the news online. He tweeted, "As predicted, YNW Bortlen took the plea deal. He also agreed to a proffer, which means he's talking." Phillips didn't stop there, hinting that Bortlen's words could become devastating evidence for the state, filling in the gaps that prosecutors had struggled to close during Melly's first trial. What looked like legal strategy on paper was, in the eyes of many, the ultimate act of betrayal. And with that single agreement to a proffer, Bortlen's name was cemented in controversy, not just as a defendant, but as the man who might help bring down YNW Melly once and for all. Bortlen's legal team knew his reputation was hanging by a thread, so they came back swinging, desperate to control the narrative. His attorney, Fred Haddad, stood in front of cameras and flat out denied the swirling accusations that his client had flipped. "Let's be clear," Haddad insisted. "My client is not snitching. There is no agreement to testify against anyone. The state wanted information about my client's involvement, and he provided that. Nothing more." On paper, it sounded like a clean defense, but in the streets, those words barely registered. The problem? Legal jargon doesn't mean much in hood culture. No matter how carefully Haddad tried to draw the line between a proffer and testifying, the optics told a different story. In the eyes of the hip-hop community, especially the part that lives and dies by the street code, the truth was already written. Bortlen chose self-preservation over loyalty. The technical details didn't matter. Perception did. And the perception was that he had sold out the very brotherhood he once called family. Social media wasted no time dragging him. On X, timelines exploded with brutal takes, memes, and accusations. Some users were convinced this was the final nail in Melly's coffin, while others mocked the contradictions between their stories. One viral post summed it up perfectly. Bortlen is pleading guilty to helping Melly commit the murder of his two friends, while Melly's still in court saying he didn't do it. That kind of contradiction only fueled the fire, making Bortlen look even more like the weak link. The legal team could scream, "not snitching," until their voices went hoarse. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict had already been delivered. Bortlen had broken the code. And in hip-hop, that kind of stain doesn't wash off. To really understand why the backlash against Bortlen hit so hard, you gotta step back and look at the bigger picture, the street code itself, and how deep it runs through hip-hop culture. In this world, snitching isn't just frowned upon, It's considered the ultimate violation, the one act that can erase everything you ever built. The prohibition on cooperating with law enforcement is carved into the foundation of the culture, rooted in distrust, loyalty, and survival. It's not written in law books, but in the hearts of the people, separating the real ones from the fakes. The outrage over Bortlen's plea deal didn't come out of nowhere. It comes from a history stretching generations back. A history where marginalized communities, especially African Americans, have been targeted, abused, and betrayed by the very system meant to protect and serve. That legacy of police brutality, wrongful convictions, and systemic injustice created a survival rule: never side with the oppressor. In neighborhoods where the system has always felt like an enemy, cooperating with the feds isn't just seen as betrayal of your friends, it is betrayal of your people, your block, and your community. And that's why Bortlen's deal cut so deep. In legal circles, it was framed as strategy, a way to save himself. But in the streets, it read like he had crossed over to the other side, aligning himself with a system long viewed as hostile to the very existence of the culture. This wasn't simply about one case or one courtroom. It was about the symbolism. To many, Bortlen's decision wasn't just self-preservation, it was the ultimate disrespect to a principle that hip-hop has lived and died by for decades. For Bortlen, the snitching label wasn't just casual hate. It was a death sentence for his entire identity. These accusations carried the power to erase his credibility in both the rap game and the streets. Once branded a snitch, it's almost impossible to bounce back. He risked being iced out of the very communities that once embraced him, blacklisted from industry events, cut off from collabs, and shunned by peers who live by the code. In the entertainment world, where perception is everything, that kind of stain follows you like a shadow you can't shake. And let's be real, the music industry, for all its glitz and corporate polish, still bends to the rules of the street. Those unwritten codes carry serious weight. And once you violate them, doors slam shut. Artists accused of breaking the code often find themselves professionally blackballed, their careers collapsing before their eyes. For Bortlen, that was the risk he walked into with this deal. But the timing of his decision adds another layer. The psychological pressure was insane. Released on bond in May 2020, Bortlen was placed on house arrest while Melly remained caged, battling his case from a cell. That separation carved out two completely different realities for the so-called brothers. While Melly stayed locked down in darkness, Bortlen was moving around his home, tasting freedom every single day, reminded of everything he stood to lose. And once you've had a glimpse of what life on the outside feels like, the thought of losing it forever can twist your mind, push you into choices you swore you'd never make. That taste of freedom might have been the very thing that set the stage for his ultimate betrayal. As the years dragged on, the contrast between Melly and Bortlen's realities became impossible to ignore. By August 2025, Melly made a dramatic shakeup, firing his old legal squad and bringing in Drew Findling, the same heavyweight attorney who had represented NBA Youngboy. It was a clear signal that Melly was preparing for war after surviving 2,387 days locked down without a sentence. That number alone was staggering, over 6 years behind bars with his future hanging in limbo. Meanwhile, Bortlen was staring down his own date with destiny, with a looming trial that could have easily left him rotting in prison alongside Melly for life. The pressure was suffocating on both sides, but the decisions each man made revealed just how far their paths had split. And maybe the most heartbreaking detail of all? Court records showed that back in 2020, when prosecutors tried to flip Melly, he refused to testify against Bortlen. That was loyalty in its rawest form. Melly had the chance to save himself, and he still wouldn't throw his day one under the bus. But when the tables turned years later, Bortlen made the opposite choice. He took the deal, gave up the proffer, and in the eyes of the streets, betrayed the very man who had once protected him. That's what makes the whole saga sting even deeper. This wasn't just legal strategy, it was personal. What had started as a brotherhood built on music and survival ended as a case study in betrayal. The psychological toll was massive. Both young men had risen with dreams of rap superstardom, only to watch those dreams crumble in the meat grinder of Florida's justice system. What was once loyalty had now curdled into resentment, and the culture was left asking, in the face of survival, is brotherhood ever really unbreakable? By the time September 2025 rolled around, the YNW collective was nothing but a shattered memory. 2 brothers had been buried, the crew had disbanded, and the futures of the remaining members were reduced to endless court hearings, stacks of legal motions, and the slow grind of a justice system that devours young men whole. In that setting, Bortlen's decision to take the plea deal wasn't to just about strategy or betrayal. It was about survival. For him, it was the faint hope of one day stepping back into the world, rebuilding a life that had been slipping through his fingers for 6 long years. But here's the brutal truth. Survival comes with a price. Understanding why Bortlen made that choice doesn't erase the consequences it triggered. The moment word spread about his deal, the conversation inside hip-hop wasn't about whether he saved himself. It was about whether he could ever live with the weight of what he sacrificed, and more chillingly, whether the streets themselves would even let him live with it. Because the price of freedom isn't written in court transcripts. It is written in reputation, in legacy, and in the way your name echoes long after you're gone. Bortlen's proffer and plea sent shockwaves far beyond the sterile walls of the Broward County Courthouse. The ripples tore through a culture already raw from years of betrayals, broken codes, and shattered brotherhoods. By September 9, 2025, as the dust settled, the full cost of Cortland Bortlen Henry's deal became clear. He hadn't just bought his freedom. He may have sold his place in the culture forever, trading the respect of the streets for the cold comfort of survival. This wasn't just about shaving years off a prison sentence. This was about a full-blown restructuring of Bortlen's identity, his future, and his standing inside a culture where loyalty is valued above money, fame, and even life itself. By inking that plea, he wasn't only securing his own shot at freedom, he was redefining how the world would forever see him. And that move didn't just shift his personal legacy. It sent shockwaves straight into Melly's trial. Up until this point, the state's case against YNW Melly had been shaky. Analysts described it as weak, relying heavily on circumstantial evidence, thin strands of ballistics, phone records, and surveillance footage. That weakness was exposed in the 2023 mistrial when the jury deadlocked and refused to convict, proving that doubt was alive and well. For a moment, it looked like Melly had a real shot at walking free. But then came Bortlen's proffer, and that single session could flip the board completely. Even if his defense team swore he wasn't cooperating, the reality was simple. The details Bortlen provided filled in the holes the prosecution couldn't enclose on their own. His words gave them the narrative glue they desperately needed, the connective tissue to turn scattered evidence into a story that could actually convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the heart of why plea deals in co-defendant cases are so controversial, so radioactive. Judicial protections and lawyer denials mean nothing in the eyes of the culture. The moment you sit across from prosecutors and start talking, you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. And for Melly, that line might be the difference between walking free and never breathing outside air again. What makes Bortlen's proffer so dangerous for Melly is that it doesn't even have to come in the form of direct courtroom testimony to cause damage. The prosecution can weave his statements into their strategy in subtle but devastating ways, filling gaps, tightening timelines, and reshaping the jury's perception without ever putting him on the stand. For Melly, the psychological toll of that reality is crushing. After 2,187 days locked down with no sentence, imagine watching your childhood friend, the same man you once called a brother, cut a deal that could see him free in just a few short years. That isn't just betrayal. That's salt poured into an already bleeding wound. This was the same friend Melly had once proudly posted about on Instagram, expressing love for his YNW family and calling Bortlen his brother for life. Now that bond was shattered, replaced by the brutal truth. Survival had trumped solidarity. The message was clear. Loyalty had an expiration date when freedom was on the line. But here's the catch. While Bortlen may have secured his physical freedom, what he sacrificed in exchange could haunt him forever. His plea deal has been described as a Faustian bargain, a trade of cultural credibility for a chance to breathe outside prison walls. And in hip-hop, credibility isn't optional, it's currency. Without it, you're broke in the ways that matter most. Bortlen's career prospects are now staring down a cliff. In an industry where street credibility drives collaborations, features, and respect, being labeled a snitch is like carrying a permanent scarlet letter. Other artists, terrified of guilt by association, may refuse to work with him to protect their own reputations. Because even with the corporate machine behind rap, the culture still bows to the street rules. And in those rules, betrayal isn't just remembered, it's punished. The fallout from Bortlen's plea deal doesn't exist in a vacuum. It mirrors a pattern we'd be seen in hip-hop again and again. Look at the YSL Ryko case. When Gunna accepted his plea in 2022, the internet exploded with accusations of snitching. Despite his public denials and insistence that he hadn't turned against Young Thug, the damage was already done. Even though Gunna has managed to maintain some level of commercial success, his street credibility took a permanent hit. In a culture where authenticity is everything, once your reputation is scarred by snitch allegations, it's nearly impossible to project the same aura again. For Bortlen, the challenge is even more brutal than what Gunna faced. Gunna had years of chart-topping records, a massive fan base, and a catalog deep enough to carry him through the backlash. Bortlen? He doesn't have that cushion. His discography is thin. His career was just starting to take shape when the legal storm swallowed him whole, and now he won't even be eligible to step back into the world until at least 2028. By then, the culture will have evolved, and he'll be fighting uphill to reclaim relevance, all while carrying the weight of a snitch label on his back. And the stakes don't stop at music. The safety implications are far heavier. In the streets, being branded as someone who flipped can make you a target, not just for online slander, but for real-world retaliation. While career credibility might be rebuilt with time, the threats to his safety could follow him forever. For Bortlen, survival outside those prison walls might prove to be just as dangerous as survival inside them. The conversation around Bortlen's safety isn't just paranoia, it's deadly serious. On Reddit, users openly speculated that his only real option would be to leave Florida entirely and live low-key, maybe even change identities, just to dodge retaliation or lifelong stigma. That kind of talk shows just how unforgiving the consequences can be when the street code is violated, especially in a case this high profile. In this world, punishments don't come through lawsuits or industry bans alone. They come through the kind of retaliation that can be immediate, brutal, and permanent. Even legal professionals recognize the danger. The attorney representing YNW Juvie family publicly raised alarms about Bortlen's safety after the plea deal, requesting a deposition within 30 days specifically because of the risks he now faces. That urgency spoke volumes. It showed that even within the sterile world of legal proceedings, there's an acknowledgement that Bortlen's life could be hanging by a thread. Cooperation in a case this explosive isn't just a legal maneuver. It's a scarlet letter that can make you a marked man. But this case isn't only about Bortlen or Melly. It is about the culture itself. The YNW saga has cracked open a deeper debate that has been simmering in hip-hop for years. How toxic is the street code when it collides with real legal strategy? On one side, you have survival, the pragmatic decision to take a plea and avoid a life sentence. On the other side, you have the weight of cultural expectation, where loyalty is placed above freedom, above family, even above life itself. And right now, Bortlen is caught in the crossfire between those two worlds, paying the price for choosing survival over solidarity. But here's the ugly truth. Street culture doesn't do nuance. No matter the context, no matter the pressure, any form of cooperation is seen as a hard violation of the code. That S, what creates one of the darkest double binds in hip-hop and street life. Young men caught between two impossible options. On one side, You cooperate with authorities, grab a plea, and secure a chance at freedom. But you instantly risk being labeled a snitch, shunned by your peers, and even marked for violence. On the other side, you stay solid, refuse to fold, and end up staring down the rest of your life behind concrete walls with no reward for your loyalty. It's a lose-lose, and the system is built that way on purpose. Think about it. The courts don't reward silence. There's no medal for loyalty, no reduced sentence for keeping your mouth shut. But in the streets, there's also no forgiveness if you decide to talk. That contradiction leaves countless young people trapped in a cycle that eats them alive. And when you add the music industry into the mix, it gets even uglier. Because in hip-hop, this toxic setup has birthed a whole culture where the less successful associates are often expected to sacrifice themselves, to throw away their lives behind bars, just so the star artist can keep shining. That unspoken expectation turns brotherhood into exploitation, a morally questionable dynamic where loyalty isn't about love, but about protecting someone else's brand. And in the YNW case, Bortlen's plea deal ripped the mask off that reality, exposing just how brutal and unforgiving the game really is. For Bortlen, the story isn't black and white. It's layered with contradictions and cold realities. If the analysis is on point, then maybe Melly and his camp always expected Bortlen to be the fall guy, the expendable soldier sacrificing his freedom so the more talented, more marketable star could keep his career alive. In that context, Bortlen's plea deal can be viewed less as betrayal and more as rebellion, a refusal to play into a system that demanded he throw away his life so another man could keep shining. Instead of martyring himself, he chose survival. But survival comes at a steep cost. The long-term consequences for both men are brutal. Melly's retrial has already been pushed to January 2027, which means he'll be sitting in a cell for at least 2 more years before his fate is decided. And those 2 years will be spent wrestling with the cold fact that his former brother, the man he once trusted, has now given prosecutors the very information they'll use to try and bury him for life. That is not just a legal battle. That is a psychological war eating away every single day he remains locked down. Meanwhile, Bortlen will ride out the next several years behind bars, knowing freedom isn't going to feel free. When he does get out, he'll be walking into a world where suspicion, hostility, and danger shadow his every step. The snitch label isn't just an insult. It is a scar that never fades, and no press release or attorney's denial can scrub it clean. Even if his proffer never directly implicates Melly, the secrecy of courtroom deals ensures the streets will never believe otherwise. And then there's the financial fallout. Record labels chase marketability, not liability. If Bortlen's fan base crumbles under the weight of snitching allegations, labels will think twice before putting serious money behind him. Add in the fact that he'll still be incarcerated until at least 2028, and the business side looks bleak. In an industry that preaches freedom of expression, but bows to street authenticity, Bortlen may find himself free from prison walls, but trapped in a different kind of cage, with his career, his credibility, and even his safety hanging by a thread. At the end of the day, the music industry remains a machine, one fundamentally driven by profit margins, marketability, and commercial appeal. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of all is how Bortlen's plea deal didn't just decide his fate in court. It shattered what was once a genuine brotherhood. This was a bond born in the trenches, forged through poverty, street politics, and the shared dream of making it out together through music. What began as family is now nothing more than rubble, destroyed under the crushing weight of prosecutors, tactics, and the unrelenting pressure of Florida's justice system. The YNW Collective, once a symbol of hope, creativity, and escape from one of the state's hardest environments, has been reduced to a cautionary tale. A story not about stardom, but about survival, betrayal, and the impossible choices young men are forced to make when street codes clash with the courtroom. What was once a movement is now a case study, a warning about the cost of loyalty and the brutal reality of what happens when the system pits brothers against each other. And as this saga continues to unfold, one thing is clear: The reverberations of September 9th, 2025 will echo through hip-hop and street culture for years to come. Whether Bortlen's gamble will ultimately be worth it is still a question without an answer. But what's certain is this: the price of his freedom has already been paid, not just in years behind bars, but in the destruction of reputation, brotherhood, and trust that can never be rebuilt. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to dive deeper into another explosive story just like this, click on one of the boxes on your screen right now. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.